It has been said that Tyler Robinson, the 22-year-old suspect in the assassination of Charlie Kirk, had, and I quote, hate in his heart toward Kirk. Somehow this hate turned into violence at a moment when Kirk was in an open meeting with about 3,000 students at Utah Valley University in Orem, Utah. Kirk was in a debate with students around the issue of mass shootings, beyond the tragedy of a public murder of a political operative who was a husband and a father. The irony was that this was a debate. The shooter saw that his only recourse to Kirk's ideas was to kill him. The assassination put into relief that we have lost as a nation our capacity for courtesy, civility, and empathy. Today's podcast is with a good friend of mine, Andrew Beal, retired Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Army with 3 tours in Iraq and 2 tours in Afghanistan. We have known each other for 2 years. Our legacies are quite different. He is an Army veteran of 5 tours in war zones, and me, a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War. He blames Obama for the sun rising in the East, and I worked for President Obama. Our differences are many, but on my various trips to New York, I make it a point to share a meal with Andrew and his family, and we laugh, we talk, we discuss, we even debate a little, and learn from each other. Breaking bread is a good place to remember and to celebrate e pluribus unum. From many come one. Andrew said to me today, we are at an inflection point when it comes to political violence in this country. But inflections require reflection. It is time we begin to reflect. Welcome to the Legacy Project. Now, this podcast is really about capturing people's past and their history, the things that have shaped and influenced them, and then also the legacy that we want to create. And all of us have that decision or that choice. This is a conversation beyond the boats, the houses, and the wealth that we might inherit, but it really is focusing on the values, the things that have helped shape our character. Today, our guest is retired Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Beal. From upstate New York. Exactly where do you identify living, Drew, or Andrew? Where is that at?
So we currently live in Half Moon, New York, and I'm originally from Westport, New York.
Westport, New York. I first met Drew, in fact, at a Memorial Day event where Drew was speaking as a veteran. Andrew served 3 tours in Iraq and 2 tours in Afghanistan. And we'll talk some about that and how that has shaped and influenced his life. But we're really glad to have you a part of the podcast and part of this conversation, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Well, Jim, I'm honored to be here, and thank you for asking me.
Sure. So, Andrew, you're from Westport, New York. Growing up, who are the major influences in your life? Who helped shape or define who you are and what you do?
I would say the 2 biggest were my 2 grandfathers.
Mm-hmm.
Both part of the greatest generation. My paternal grandfather served 6 years in the Navy from 1940 to 1946 on diesel submarines. He was a deck gunner. Never spoke about any of his war experiences, very quiet about that. Did speak about his time in the Navy, but mostly in terms of partying and gambling. But he was on the SS Ray, which had a pretty storied past that he never shared with me.
Mm-hmm.
And he was on every patrol that they did. And then he got out of the Navy, met my grandmother, and became a forester, ran a sawmill for about 30 years. Retired, and when I was young, he was just retiring. So he lived in my hometown. And then my grandfather, who was my maternal grandfather, he was the town supervisor. He was the town mayor before that. And then he also owned the marina in town. got to spend a tremendous amount of time with them as they were winding down their careers, almost on a near daily basis. And each one of them taught me different things, more practical things than my father had time for because he was the local town dentist. Westport only had about 900 people in it, so very um, small town. But each one of them imparted different skills, but they also imparted different values. And I'll just give a couple different examples. One, my paternal grandfather um, really taught me a lot about how to be a man, how to conduct yourself. Um, and one of the biggest lessons that he ever told me was the smartest man in any room speaks the least and listens the most. And I really tried to use that in my development, and particularly, being able to read people and, find their motivations, find what's important to them, and then use that to build a better relationship or a better organization or whatever you're doing. And then my other grandfather was much more of a religious man, and he imparted the importance and of Christianity and coming to Jesus and how important a faith-centered life is. Um, and although we are all sinners, I am a fantastic sinner. I try to get a little better every day.
I find it interesting, Andrew, that you had a grandfather that was in the Navy and another grandfather owned a marina, but you joined the Army. So,
Yep. No, we've had a family member in every war going back forever, except for I think Vietnam.
yeah.
So, but all services represented except for the Air Force.
Yeah, I discovered in my genealogy or of the legacy that I've inherited that there was a couple in every war since the French and Indian War of 1755. And
Yeah.
part of our tradition. It's interesting. I heard a quote this last week that if you're the smartest person in the room, you should probably leave.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah.
uh, what influenced your decision to join the military?
Money.
Money? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, originally I was going to go into the Army in high school. I
Mhm.
had never intended to go to college. I was going to go to, um, I was going to go in the Army on an 11 Bravo Airborne Ranger contract. And my mother had an absolute meltdown um, at the dining room table with the recruiter present as we were about to sign the paperwork for that. Um, so I did not do that.
Mhm.
So I went to college. My parents had a financial downturn, and they said, "Okay, you need to come home." I was going to college in North Carolina, and I was having a very good time down there, and I was doing well in school.
Mhm.
So I went to I was just in the student union. There was an Army ROTC recruiting table there. I walked up to the captain in charge of the recruiting event, told him my GPA, which was very high, told him that I was, a three-sport varsity athlete in high school, and he's, you know, practically fell over himself, you know,
Mhm.
trying to give me money, and they did. So
Mhm.
um, that's how I got in, and then commissioned in '98 um, as an artilleryman, and then 9/11 happened, and that's probably why I stayed.
So you did 5 tours between Iraq and Afghanistan. Uh,
Mhm.
what was your role in that? I assume you had various roles.
Various roles. So I was a baby captain in OIF-1, part of the 1st Armored Division. 1-1 Cav was our division cavalry squadron,
Hmm.
and I was the squadron fire support officer.
Hmm.
Now, by the time you know, I got to 1-1 Cav, I joined them a few months after the initial invasion. Um, we were no longer in a full combat role. By October of 03, you really have the situation was devolving into an insurgency, counterinsurgency type operations with myriad factions forming, largely based on the Sunni Shia sectarian divide, but both were, opposing the coalition um, that was there.
Hmm.
So that was a tough one because we weren't trained for counterinsurgency. We were trained for major combat operations,
Hmm.
and we were excellent at it. But that skill set, we were learning on the fly, the counterinsurgency skill set. Um, and it was a very steep learning curve. Um, I got hit with a couple IEDs in that tour. And um, we were dramatically under-equipped for a counterinsurgency operation. We were, rolling around in Humvees, unarmored Humvees with no canvas or doors on them. So it was definitely a steep learning curve there. My next um, tour was also in Iraq, again, back to Baghdad. Um, that one was a steep learning curve for me because to our battalion S3 and our battalion XO, who were both majors, field grade officers. I'm a junior captain. I haven't even commanded yet. We're pulled by CENTCOM, which is the 4-star level command that oversees all of the Middle East. And I was as a junior captain, I was made the battalion
Oh.
operations officer. So um, that was another steep learning curve there. And then my third tour was a short one. That was a good but challenging assignment. One thing I will remark about that is there was an absolute radical shift from probably February of 09, right after President Obama came into office, in terms of focus, right?
Hmm.
Um, and really constraints. Like we had, under the Bush administration, we had been relatively unconstrained in terms of ROE.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it wasn't a free for all like it was in 03, 04, but the tone and tenor of and frankly just the absolute deficit of trust that the Obama administration had in the military was immediately self-evident.
Hmm.
By the time I got to my fourth deployment that was in Afghanistan, it was it was worse because this is post what the Obama administration had regarded as a betrayal of the military. And you see by 2011, just an absolute shift away from the counterinsurgency fight and really a dedicated shift towards getting out of Afghanistan. And that is what I did in my 5th tour, even though I net that last tour, I never fired a shot in anger. I never told anybody to fire a shot in anger. Was only the recipient of a few rockets. By far the most stressful deployment I ever did because of the intransigence and gatekeeping that all of the actors around President Obama did relative to the Afghan policy. Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot about what goes on at the national level in terms of, where policy becomes strategy, becomes operationalized. And I had several very hard lessons learned in that. My point was, if you guys don't give us an end state, what we're working at, the probability of us being successful in any of this, if we don't know where we're going, right? And what you want to achieve, we're never going to give it to you, right? Mm-hmm. And I would talk to them in terms of strategic risk, operational risk, and tactical risk. And, mm-hmm. The person that I was talking with was like, well, that's a very naive way to look at this. And I was like, naive, really? Okay. Well, and they said, well, you're not considering the political risk. Because if we define an end state for you and you don't achieve it, we could lose a Senate seat here. We could lose a presidential election there. You're not thinking in terms of the political ramifications of what you're asking for. Mm. And my eyes were very widely opened by that, but also kind of, dramatically increased my cynicism and, maybe an increase in cynicism is just a different way of saying it made me grow up to the realities of how DC functions.
We're talking with retired Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Beal from Half Moon, New York, and just recapping his military career. Andrew, in terms of leadership, obviously you were thrown into positions of leadership and graduating as an officer from ROTC. What are the core principles or values of leadership that you've learned out of your military experience or other experiences for that matter?
Trust.
Trust.
If you're going to be an effective leader, whoever you're leading has to trust you. Mm. So this is easiest to explain at kind of the company grade junior officer level. So like one, they have to have trust in your competence, right? You have to know what you're doing. You have to be the expert of everything technical and tactical. Mm. You've got to be physically fit. If not the most physically fit, you've got to be, the top 5% in your organization. You've got to be able to use the weapons that your lowest enlisted members do as well as they do, if not better. And you've got to be able to have, you're not going to have the experience, but because, you're a 22 or 23-year-old person and your platoon sergeant is, maybe 34, 35 years old and has been doing this for 14 or 15 years. You're not going to have the experience, but you got to be there and at least be on par with the book knowledge in order to have a semi-credible voice in the room. That's the first thing. That's like the baseline for entry into the trust building relationship is your technical, tactical, and physical competencies in front of your formation. 2 is you can't ever lie, right? And you can't even it is incredibly better to tell your soldiers or whoever you're leading an exceptionally hard truth than it is to try and sugarcoat or gaslight them whatsoever, because they will see through it in an absolute instant. And then the third thing is you have to trust them first. In any trust relationship, I think it's really important that whoever is in charge, whoever is the leader, they've got to trust their lead first, because otherwise there's no flow, right? That trust is a thing that's got to go both ways. Mm-hmm. And you as the leader have the responsibility to trust them first.
Those are powerful words and important words, I think, for leaders in any position and any role or responsibility. Let me ask you this, and to those who are listening on this podcast, Andrew and I have known each other a little over a year, 2 years almost, or a year and a half. And I was warned when I met Andrew that he and I would probably not agree on much. I was a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War, though I came from a family steeped in what I would call the military class, with a Copple serving in every war since the French and Indian War in 1755. My father was a veteran and an older brother that served in Vietnam. Um, and I worked for President Obama. I did different roles and responsibilities. What makes it possible, Andrew, in this country for you and I to be friends, even though politically we might differ on a whole host of subjects? But what makes it possible, especially this question's in light of what's happened this week with the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the political divide that exists in this country and the violence that seems to accompany it. But what makes it possible for you and I to be friends?
Well, I think that the biggest advantage that we have is that we're old or older,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You know, we have monetized righteous indignation
Mm.
through social media, through legacy media. We have really found a way to profit on making people feel like, oh, I knew I was right. I told you so. My position is validated and your position is invalidated. And I think that change in the information environment, and now that everybody can, kind of go out there and scroll through and cherry pick the internet to find their truth instead of the truth, is how we've gotten to this point. Now, That's the description. The prescription for how we get back to where we were is very, very difficult because we've got to do a myriad number of things. But I think the first thing is it's very simple. We got to be polite to each other again,
Yeah.
just basic courtesy.
Hmm.
I don't have to, and I think one of the things that really ripped that down was when we started talking about everybody deserves respect.
Hmm.
No, absolutely not. Respect is earned.
Hmm.
Well, everybody deserves your courtesy as just a normal member of civilization.
Yeah.
Uh, we've got to earn each other's respect. And that first step to that is being courteous, having the ability to sit down and have a conversation with somebody that you may vehemently disagree with. But if we can't get past that barrier to entry of, I'm going to scream at you at all caps on Twitter, level of, kind of pedantic, 7-year-old behavior. Um, we're never going to get to the meaningful conversations where, we rail our facts against the other side's facts. And together we both come out with a better understanding for having done that. I think that the temperature of the discourse in the country has negated our ability to have a a dialectical engagement.
Hmm.
And until we get back there, it's only this gulf, this divide is only going to deepen and widen because the people on the polar extremes are the ones that are being rewarded um, with the most clicks, the most likes. They're driving all the dopamine hits. These terrible, terrible, horrific devices that we're all slaves to now.
I love what you're saying, and I think that's an important piece. Um, it's not just simply, and this is a question as much as it is a statement, um, that uh, when you and I are together, usually every other month or so, and we have dinner together, our families come together, it's not that we avoid a topic, it's that the issue of, I so respect you and your service and your education, your family values. I see it evidenced in so many different ways that we could talk about difficult subjects, but not personalize it in such a way that, well, gee, I'm not going to invite you to Thanksgiving dinner
Right.
uh, because I'm afraid of the topic. I mean, I think there's a fear operating in the broader culture that I just don't want to bring up difficult topics. That if we're going to disagree, then we just don't talk about it.
Right.
And which is, I think, a fundamental threat to democracy. Uh,
Yes.
yeah.
And I think the other piece of that is, the First Amendment was the First Amendment for a reason.
Yeah.
Um, and we talk about the rights that we have under the First Amendment. We talk way too little about the responsibilities that we have associated with all of our rights.
Mhm.
So ideas, thoughts, expressions are far more powerful than any weapon that we could ever manufacture. Um, and we never talk about the responsibilities that are inherent to those First Amendment rights, rights of association, religion, speech, the press. Um, we only want the um kind of the candy element of it.
Hmm.
I can say whatever I want whenever. Well, yes, you can, but there is also a responsibility as a um as a grown man in society or a grown woman in society
Hmm.
to use those words with care, to use those words to um maximum effect. And if the only thing you're going for is to, just be this bombastic piece of clickbait, then you're not living up to the responsibilities of your First Amendment rights.
Yeah. And it's interesting that we're working on this project for the 250th anniversary of the celebration of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And been doing a lot of reading and reflecting on the environment and the ideas that circulated, that generated the Declaration of Independence, and then a few years later, obviously, the Constitution, creating a more perfect union, recognizing that where we were was not perfect. And I've been reminded several times that the Declaration of Independence and the unalienable rights that we have of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the concept of pursuit of happiness isn't that you feel good, it's that you do good. And in doing good, you are going to experience happiness. And it was more of a classical Greek idea of what it meant, and also coupled with, frankly, the Bible in terms of how we understand doing good. And even though the Declaration of Independence, as I've been reminded by several groups, uh, was not for everybody. It was not for women. It was not for Indians. It was not for the slaves. um, it becomes that over the 250-year history. Um, and I'm wondering your thinking, um, given the fact that you've committed your life to serving the country and protecting those rights of what you find in the Constitution and also what we struggle for in the revolution to achieve for people to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Uh, what do we need to do from your perspective today in order to protect those rights for everybody? And I love what you said in terms of conflict, in terms of courtesy, you earn respect, etc. But there are a lot of people, both on the right and the left, who talk about democracy is currently threatened. And it seems to be the threat is that we simply can't talk to each other. I
Right.
mean, that's one of the major threats. There are others, of course, but that is one that really concerns me. That a Charlie Kirk can come to Utah, where I live, and while I would not agree with maybe 5% of what Charlie Kirk ever says, but I have to respect the fact that he went into tough places to have a conversation and was willing to debate and engage um, and and to listen and both sides engage to where they were listening. It's sort of recovering the William F. Buckley era of the 1960s, where Buckley would take on any challenge. He wanted to have a debate, and the
Right.
ideas being debated is what creates that dialectic, which evolves into uh, certain truths by which you live and values by which you live. So I'm wondering your thinking in terms of today's culture, and I think your assessment in terms of the role of social media is important. But how do we preserve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all people?
Well, I think, and even the founders recognized that this was going to be a finely rung thing, and it was going to be fragile.
Mhm.
Um, and so far, it's stood the test of time. But there's two things that we have to have as overwhelming supermajority of the citizenry, and that is both moral and religious people.
Mm.
And I think you're seeing a faith renaissance right now, particularly in not the millennials, but the Gen Z generation is coming back to church, even
Mm.
if their parents, the young boomers and the Gen Xers didn't go to church. They are returning to church without their parents. And I think that's very, very important. And it's not just church, it's synagogue, it's, what have you. The ultimately it gets down to a belief in there is a truth. And I think the reason that that is important is, we might not be able to discreetly measure it or define it, but the belief in an absolute truth. There is a truth out there. There is definitions for what is moral and what is amoral.
Mm.
Um, you've got whether wherever that belief window comes from, in your mind, in order for us to get back to some semblance of um, you know, treating
Civility.
each other, you know, well.
Yeah,
Uh,
civility.
Civility, exactly.
Yeah.
You got to have that as a foundational underpinning. The other thing I would say is we've got to find a way to do better by our kids, right? We've got to impart those truths into our children. And for a long time, I think we have not the Star Wars character, but there was a book by Dr. Spock on child rearing that was very,
Yeah.
very popular. And you you may disagree with me. I think that did kind of immeasurable harm out of the intent to do tremendous good,
No,
right?
I understand that. Yeah.
We probably got 30 years of kids that grew up under that mindset,
Mm.
and we've got to claw that back. We got to get back to a place where we instill some form of discipline into our children. And, I have a very libertarian bent to me, right? But I would almost welcome, like, I would rather kids start driving at 12 and they can't get their first cell phone until they're 16.
Yeah.
I would much rather
Yeah.
go for that than where we're at now.
Well, you alluded to it earlier. There doesn't seem to be much room for accountability, and in terms of the issue of responsibility and how you exercise that. Let me ask you this, and we only have a few more minutes, but I want to ask you this question. What is the legacy you want to leave behind? The legacy that, in terms of the footprint that you create, not only in your family, but in the world in which you live and work. Um, I mean, Stephen Covey wrote the book Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. In the second habit, he talks about living with the end in mind. And he takes you through this exercise of attending your funeral today. What would people say? And then he asks you, what would you, 10 years from now, if your funeral were to take place, what would you want people to say? What is the legacy Andrew Beal wants to leave?
I would say the most important thing is strong kids that have strong families,
They have
um,
strong what?
that have strong families themselves.
Families, yeah. Hmm.
The whole purpose of humanity is to have family,
Hmm.
you know. Um, that so for any legacy to be meaningful, I think you've got to have that as your top menu item on any legacy list. The other thing I would like to do, we're still in the process of pulling this together, but I would like to um, do more to help vets, particularly combat vets. A buddy of mine that I served with. We're trying to put an organization together for the Capital District of New York right now. We're trying to do it through the government, and turns out that is uh, let's just say it's a very deliberate and slow moving process.
Right.
Um, and he and I are both, kind of, hey, let's just, have a bias for action, get out there and, start helping these people.
Mm.
Um, and there's definitely a process, and the process is king.
Mm.
Um, so we're working through that. If that doesn't work out, we're going to go and we're going to form a private organization, and go forward with that. The other thing that I aspire to is local office. So I think um, politics and power is best situated when it's proximal to its delivery. So
Mm.
I've thought a lot about that, but that is basically saying your most important government is your local government.
Local government,
You
right.
know, we all get super animated about these national political problems and challenges and stuff like that because it basically has devolved into modern political theater, right?
Mm.
But what really matters to you is, you know, do I feel safe in my own neighborhood? Do I have running water? Do I have, a good school system? Do I have, can I flourish where I'm at?
Yeah.
Um, and I want to do that. I want to do that in my hometown of Westport. And I'm working uh, quickly to get back there so I can make that happen. Um,
That's a good point.
and then probably the last thing is, and with my career path, of helping veterans and being a small town politician that probably makes less than $20,000 a year. I I I would like to take on some philanthropic pursuits that really enhance and um, build out first, starting with my hometown. Um, but that'll be done on the back of my organizing and you know, kind of development abilities rather than my own checkbook.
Yeah. Well, um, let me ask you one more question. Um, the events of this past week with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, uh, I've heard several politicians say this could and maybe should be a watershed moment where we realize that the political violence that has been a part of our country's history, and particularly most noticeable since these shootings become televised from John Kennedy forward. I worry that it's going to be the news lead for the next week, and then it just disappears. Um, do you think there's a mood in the country to get back to civility? Uh, or will this assassination be a catalyst for a discussion around the need to return to civility? Or will it just be uh, a news item for a week and then we go on?
I think that well, first off, let me say it's my extreme hope that this is an inflection point.
Mhm.
But within society, inflection requires reflection. And we have basically taken that ability away from ourselves in the way that um, we consume information now. My fear is that this, 10 days from now, this isn't going to be a thing anymore. Political violence will have moved out of the news cycle, and we'll be on to the next crisis, whatever that might be. I think, unfortunately, America has always had a history of political violence. And it gets back to that responsibility thing. It takes a moral and religious people to wield these massive and powerful rights.
Mm-hmm.
And the first and most important of those is the right of free speech. And we've got to bring civility back to our discourse. And one of the things that I really liked about Charlie Kirk was he was never rude.
Yeah.
He might be forceful in making a point.
Yeah.
But he never degraded or defamed the people that he was debating.
Right.
And if we can just get to that baseline level of civility in our discourse,
Mm-hmm.
I think that that will be a win.
Yeah.
So in terms of legacy, if that is Charlie Kirk's legacy, we all owe him greatly.
Yeah. Andrew, thank you. We've been talking with Andrew Beal, retired Lieutenant Colonel, friend and colleague. We appreciate the time you've taken to be with us on the Legacy Project. And to our audience, just a reminder that you have an opportunity to shape and define your legacy, the legacy that you're going to leave behind. Thank you. To find out more information about this conversation and other Legacy Podcast episodes, go to servantforge.org. Please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app and consider leaving us a review. The podcast was produced by Matt Erickson, music by David Hyde. Please look for a new episode on our podcast coming out soon. Remember, you have inherited a great legacy. You have an opportunity to create a great legacy. Engage your past to build your future.